Let me just make sure we've got our interpreter up. Just one moment here. All right, so the interpreters, I'm getting a message from them wondering if we can pin Tawny. Can we pin her? Or can we spotlight her and I so you can see the three of us at the same time? You know what, we can pin her once she does start presenting. Yes, I don't see a problem with that as long as we can see the interpreters as well. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Sorry everyone we just wanna make sure our technical aspect is working here over the Zoom platform, which I'm sure we're all very, very familiar with now. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for our presentation on Educational Advocacy 101 for families. We really appreciate having you join us, although we have asked everyone to turn their videos off and mute their microphones. We do know that you're there, and so thank you. As I said, my name's Terry, and I am the chair of Virginia Hands and Voices. I am also the parent of 3 children. My oldest is 10 years old and is deaf, and I am joining you today from Central Virginia, outside of the Richmond area. Joining us today, we have a few people who are important here. Of course, everyone's important, but we have Desi Berry. She is co-hosting the event with me today. She is our board secretary and a parent of a hard of hearing child up in Northern Virginia, and she is working on everything behind the scenes with Zoom, so thank you very much. And then, of course, we have Tawny Holmes-Leibach with us, our presenter, which I will introduce to you in a few minutes. And then we have our ASL interpreters with Civic Access. So I know that we've all been thrust into a virtual world, and it seems like Zoom is our go-to for meetings, but we recognize that maybe some of you are using Zoom for the first time or aren't very familiar with all of the features. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and let you know. Sorry, I'm going to mute my phone here. We have myself and the interpreter spotlighted right now, so you should be seeing just us on the screen. If you scroll over the little blue dot that is on people's names, you can choose to hide non-video participants. You can also hide non-video participants through your settings button, and when you do that, you will only see the interpreter and the presenter. You also have the ability to pin folks for yourself. So if you want to pin the presenter or pin the ASL interpreter, then you also have the ability to do that. I see that somebody is asking for a link to access captions. And if you can just give me a moment, I am going to pause and put that in the chat box. You have remote conference captioning up and running for Hamilton Relay. There is the link to access the captions. Okay, I think I've said everything. I feel like I'm jumping all around. You know, I feel a little pressured today, I have to admit, because first of all, I can't see anyone. Second of all, we've been hosting these virtual meetings for quite a while now, but we feel like so many other people are, and it's just become this way of handling professional business. So I think I'm just a little bit nervous. I want to make sure that I'm doing everything right. I did thank Civic Access for providing our interpreters, Paulina and Megan. So thank you very much for being here with us today. For those of you, I do see a lot of names on our participant list that are familiar, but for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization, I'd like to say hello and welcome you. Hands and Voices is a nonprofit, parent-driven organization dedicated to supporting deaf and hard of hearing children. And what makes us unique is that we are unbiased about communication choices and believe that a choice that a family makes is the best choice for them. Our membership and supporters are comprised of professionals, adults, children who may use their hands, their voices, or both to communicate. And we host as many outreach activities, parent-professional collaboration, and advocacy efforts focused on enabling deaf and hard of hearing children to reach their highest potential. That's all I have to say. The pressure is off me. Now I would like to stop talking and introduce our presenter, Tawny Holmes Slybach. She is an attorney and for the past 8 years has worked for the National Association for the Deaf, focusing on educational advocacy. She is also the current undergraduate programs coordinator for the Department of ASL and Deaf Studies at Gallaudet University. Tawny provides policy consultation on a local, national, and global level, and she has contributed over 15 years of dedication to advocacy and youth empowerment. I've had the pleasure to meet Tawny the past couple of years through national EDI meetings and national Hands and Voices conferences, and we've been working on getting this scheduled for quite some time. So we are honored to have you here today on this Friday afternoon to present to our audience. Before I turn it over to you, I do just want to say that we have allotted 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. So please keep those handy and we will utilize the chat box and the raising of the hand feature. With that, I am going to go ahead and turn off my video and mute myself. And if we can go ahead and turn it over to Tawny, we will be sure to pin you so you can share your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I appreciate you all being here. Like Terry said, we've had the opportunity to meet many times, and I believe Terry, this is the interpreter speaking. Do you mind spotlighting Tawny? It's her. There we go. Thank you. So I will back up. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. As Terry mentioned, we have been able to meet several times through national conferences. And so I just want to remind everyone of the importance of local chapters for family support, resources, information, and I'm really happy that I can be here tonight with you all. I do have a PowerPoint with a lot of information, and I'll just go through the PowerPoint, kind of review IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I'll do some review of that, and I'm not going to go in deep details, but just a general overview so we can all understand the meaning and everyone knows what their rights are. I'll share some tips, and I'll focus on that instead of doing a deep review of the law itself. So I have about 10 slides total, and then we'll dive into examples, to common challenges, some tips for IEP meetings, and I look forward to all of your questions. And just if something comes up, if you have a situation that you need help with, just know that the National Association of the Deaf, we are happy to accept your request for help. We can share information and resources, and I will make sure to send out a link at the end. I will type it in the chat box. So if you feel that there's something you have going on that you need some advocacy, or if you have something that you feel would benefit everyone, you can go ahead and share that at the end and we'll address that. So please do type in the chat box if you need clarification, if you're not sure anything about the presentation. I'll present for about 30 minutes. But again, if you need any clarification at any point, just go ahead and put that in the chat box. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and I will share the PowerPoint now. Hopefully the screen will change and you guys can all adjust your screens accordingly to make sure that everything looks okay. And we'll close the participant chat box. and we will make there should be a bar in the middle of the screen in the PowerPoint. You'll see it when it comes up, so you can adjust the screen sizes and make that however you would like to look. But if you can't hear something, if you can't see the captions, anything comes up, please communicate that through the chat box. So we want to make sure that everyone is taken care of, and Hands and Voices will make sure to handle anything that comes up. Letting everyone adjust their screens as needed right now. So we're just giving some time for people to adjust their screens. Do you see the white lines in the middle? There should be, I know it can be hard to see. If you click the boxes in the top corner, you should be able to move things around. Side by side.
So this is the first part. This is mostly just the review of what we're going to be going over. You know, going over some of the usual things. So I'm going to send this PowerPoint to everyone at the end of this. First, we're going to focus on age-related to laws for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that covers people who are from the age of just being born all the way through 21. There's Part A, Part B, and Part C as well. This is Part C. That's designed for those who are the ages of 0 to 4. Some do have an extended IFP. Individual Family and Services Plan, IFSP. Some have an extension, which means that you can continue that IFSP services from the ages of 3 to 4, depending on where you guys live. In general, those who are age of 3 are under Category B. The focus is on the school's role, what they are required to provide for students. The IFSP really mostly focuses on families and what they need for their children. Just so you see the student in the middle, that's my child. Signing the number 3, he's 3 years old, so that's a picture right there. He's now 15 years old, or she's now 15 years old. And I have 4 godchildren who are also very close. I'm very involved in their lives. The oldest is 17, it's a boy. And then there's a girl who's 15 years old, a girl who's 13 years old, and then the youngest, a boy who just turned 9. So they live in Indiana, in Posey, Indiana. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus, I'm not able to see them as often now, which is unfortunate, but we do use FaceTime and things like that. So we do have these resources so we can still get together. But people are really using those screens a lot now, things like education and whatnot, but we are trying to do our best to stay in touch. So now this is just a basic review of what IDEA is. Just a summary of the federal law that was passed in 1975. As I mentioned before, we're talking about Part C and B. Those are different age groups. Now, IDEA does have 4 different parts. IA is just definitions, meanings, things of that nature. B is for those who are ages from 3 to 21. C is from 0 to 3. And then D related to funding. So how different states can receive this kind of funding, things of that nature. So those are the 4 different areas. So before 1975, there were really no federal mandated educational students or things for students with disabilities. Schools were able to reject those types of students. They really didn't have a place for them. So many families felt left out, kind of stuck, had limited options. They could enter public schools, but it really became almost like a warehouse, you know, somewhere that you put them, they would sit in the back. There would be differently abled children, and the teachers would just have to do their best to try to accommodate them. So typically they just leave them be and let them, you know, color, and there really wasn't a lot of learning actually going on. And of course there was various types of things going on depending on the school, but there wasn't a lot of teaching and not a lot of learning happening. Sometimes it'd be placed into mental institutes as well. So it was a really big challenge for a lot of families at that time. They didn't have a lot of support. They didn't really have an appropriate way to address these educational issues. So those who were deaf and blind at that time, they really had some institutions already set up throughout the United States. They had a pretty strong curriculum going already. They had motivated teachers, they had training programs and things like that that were unique for those who had disabilities. So deaf were the only, they're 1% of the population at that time. And the deaf-blind represented 0.5% of that deaf population, or the disabled population at the time. So it was a very small percentage. So they needed a committee to establish some laws in order to protect these children with these disabilities, regardless of what disability they had. So the goal was to get federal funding so states could provide free public school, public education, and the least restrictive environment. So they could associate with those who are also non-disabled peers as well. Because that really had not been happening at that time. All disabled students were kind of linked together, regardless of which type of disability they had, and there wasn't really any accommodations for their specific needs or considering them as individuals, their strengths and their weaknesses. So when that committee had passed this law, they sent it up to the United States federal courts in order to develop these regulations and specific requirements to see what the school districts could be doing and what they haven't been doing yet. See what an IEP should be looking like for the individual education plan. And this was beneficial for many people. So they did not always take into consideration language and communication needs for children. And that's still an issue even until today. We're still trying to figure that out on how to improve the education system in that area. So deaf and hard of hearing children still only make up 1% of students with disabilities. So typically when it comes to public education, usually they'll see a deaf child like one time every 7 years. So they have to re-educate these teachers pretty frequently. There isn't always a standard ready. No, and it's great if they can have interpreters in place and things like that. And so that they're more aware of how to better support these students. It's important that a child gets the education that they deserve. So we're looking for corporations, organizations, and help provide that. So this is a continuum of placements, including special schools or mainstream schools. Each state is supposed to provide a variety of options for each child. Sometimes a school district feels like, oh, you know, I have to keep them here regardless of their needs. Or sometimes they feel like they have to go to a deaf school, but that's really not the case. It's really the family's decision on what's best for their child. And that's, sorry.
So it is important to emphasize for deaf and hard of hearing children, everyone is so different. Everyone is individual, and it's important to focus on one individual, their language processing, their social and emotional needs, and their academic process as well. So it's important to keep the individual in mind. This is interesting. So NAD published this saying that most states view placement, you can see the top left, the triangle, the pyramid up there, that there's general education with no additions or services provided. And then as you keep going down, you see deaf programs, you see special day schools, and at the very bottom, you see residential or hospital placements. So it's important that they're starting at the top and working their way down is how the schools feel. But it's actually important for there to be a range. You can see we use the word continuum, and this is the sign for that. So you can see there's kind of like a range to meet each deaf child where they are. And so it's NAD's goal to have each state recognize that continuum and recognize the individuality of each student instead of just trying something first, failing, trying again, failing all the way down, because that, it makes a struggle and there's a back and forth and it's setting some students up to fail. So we will get back to that a little bit later as well. So these are some important things to know about laws and wording for parents of deaf and hard of hearing children. These are things you guys have to know. We say that you have to memorize it, but you can find it easily if you don't memorize it. So all of the IDEA laws, it's 100 pages. So the most important paragraph is right here, that deaf and hard of hearing children, so I'll give you a few seconds to look over this section right here. So the bottom line here is that every time an IEP meeting occurs, we should look at this and consider the options. Consider a child's needs, their language communication, their direct communication with staff or teachers, their peer social interaction, which is critical for a child's language and communication. And then we have some follow-up questions that can guide a conversation to really allow states and districts to come up with the best plan. So you can look at this here. And there are some amendments also. They're good. It's a good reminder for schools to remind them about the child's needs, about the goals, services. And so it's important to look at the language used here to use this as a model. And it's important to have language models for the students as well with their peers too. So we'll just review this briefly. So these are players who are involved in the IEP process, the school system, maybe the special education teacher. It depends really on the child's team, what that might look like, who is included for the child's team. Sometimes if a child is 5 years old, the student will come in, just say their name and introduce themselves, say their favorite subject in school, maybe say what they don't like, and then they just send them back to class. Students aren't really involved in the meeting. It depends on their age. Some students are like, oh, you're talking about me, I want to know what's going on, and are a little more involved. As they get older, it's nice to have them come in and say what's working, what's not working, see their successes and their frustrations, because that can really help guide an IEP meeting. So this is a good review always. Again, we see that pyramid on the right top hand corner, and we see the green line. So that's the basic effectiveness. And then as we go up, seeing how the IEPs are created with goals, For math, reading, social skills, speech, comprehension, there are various topics. And then they discuss services, what's needed, maybe an interpreter, maybe an FM system, captions. And then the top is accommodations. Maybe the student needs to sit in the front, or maybe they need extended time while testing. But that should be the last thing, the placement for where the student will go to school. We have to get through all of these services and accommodations. Often people start the meeting kind of backwards, and they say that they're not going to do all those things, and they start with a placement. So they want to find any school or program that fits those needs. And it's a good reminder to just say, you know, the student can be here, but they don't have to be here. There are other options. They can apply to other schools or transfer, depending on different services of need. So it's important to just keep that in mind, again, that we have a continuum of placements for various reasons as well. This is the last slide that we're going to review, and that's parents' rights. So I want to emphasize that parents have rights. I want you to feel that you have an important part in the IEP meeting. You know, they can be stressful, a big table full of a lot of people. Sometimes people bring friends or family members as an advocate to support through the meeting, maybe take notes, or just to bring water and snacks, just moral support, to have someone there to feel that your needs are met. So you can bring someone with you to these meetings. For example, I remember advocating for one child, I believe about 13 years old, and they were struggling because their school thought that they only knew 20 signs. So at that time, I had just become a lawyer. So I was talking to the parents to tell school, no, this student knows way more than 20 signs, knows even more than the parents do. And so they had a babysitter who was certified, and I'm trying to remember. So they had a certified babysitter come in. So the parents had an advocate come with them who knew the student, come to the IEP meetings, and were able to show and expand upon all the signs that the student did know, to prove that their language and communication skills were far above what the school thought them to be. So I should also mention that the child was autistic and they were hearing, and the parents were deaf. Their first language was ASL, because that was the most effective communication for that child, who themselves were autistic. But they did not have any teachers or staff in the building that knew sign language. So they had made kind of a list of limited signs that the student knew. But then as soon as they realized how much that student really could communicate, it really broadened the horizons, and teachers were able to learn sign language, and staff. And when the school became involved and supportive, the student had rapid growth, their vocabulary grew, and school is a much more successful place for them. So it's just something to keep in mind, to be aware of when you go into one of those team meetings. And sometimes we feel that we have to wait for the school to request the IEP meeting, but if you have questions or concerns, you want an amendment made, you can go ahead and request a meeting, request an amendment every once in a while, maybe twice a year. You can amend the IEP to make sure that it's staying relevant to the student. And also, I just want to also say that IEPs have a draft that's not, hard copy. They have a team that has to review everything, has to work together, discuss through each point of the IEP. So sometimes parents are not as involved and they're not really sure what's going on. So it's important to ask for, maybe you want a smaller group, a quicker meeting, things like that. So you're able to participate to the best of your ability. And maybe you have the teacher and the speech therapist, and you kind of dwindle down who actually needs to be in that team meeting to make it less overwhelming for you. And also, it is an important reminder, you can record these meetings. You can record them. People typically don't do video, but you can use your phone and set it up to record the audio, because sometimes maybe in the moment it's hard to understand, or maybe you don't have that trust and communication with the school. So that's, again, another reason why it's important to bring an advocate to the meetings with you. Maybe that's an interpreter, maybe it's an advocate, a friend, a family member, things like that. And NAD has a family support program. We have trained and certified people who come into IEP meetings or who can join via the telephone to advocate for the parents and for the child as well. So that can make you more comfortable.
I know that often people feel like you see in this picture here, that it's kind of a rush through process, but you got to pace yourselves. Schools are overwhelmed right now. There's a lot of things that they're reviewing with a lot of school going on at home. So make sure you're taking that time for that. I want to encourage you to feel more confident that it's okay to take charge of these things a little bit more if you want to. Here are some tips, and then we'll go into our Q&A time here soon. Here's some common challenges that you'll see. We see them often throughout the entire United States. Families tend to contact me saying, oh, the interpreter that I have at my child's school isn't qualified. That's something that we see very often. Maybe they don't have access to speech therapy. They're in a very rural area, or the school hasn't hired a speech therapist at that time. They don't have an ASL specialist. Many families feel like they wish they could add more things for language access or language development for the child, whether that be speech or sign. And some states are willing to provide these things while others are not. So we are working to change that so we can provide families with all the opportunities that they want to take advantage of. Sometimes we'll see some families, want to try a deaf school, just see how it goes, while others are more defensive and don't want to. And sometimes they're just being refused that option. So sometimes they would like to try out different things to see what's the best fit. And right now we're seeing a dwindling of deaf teachers. So NAD is partnering with some other organizations like the U.S. Department of Education. We're trying to get more funding, some more training for teachers of the deaf, TODs. So we're hoping that will happen in the next year or two. Sometimes we'll see that there are different expectations for the child. Like the school has some set of expectations and the family have another one. Maybe the family feels like the child can handle more things, whereas the school disagrees with them, or vice versa. And so sometimes you can ask for assessments or evaluations. Maybe if you feel like you need even more, you can ask for outside evaluations where the parent can pick who is conducting that evaluation, maybe a psychologist or a language specialist, someone who can better assess someone with disabilities, and then they can bring those results in themselves to the IEP meeting. So that's been helpful for parents in the past. So you can see that picture that I posted there of something that my daughter has experienced going to a public school in a rural town. They're saying that they could have services ready for that child there, and then they showed up for pre-K, and the only thing that they had was that poster that you see right there. There was no interpreter, there was nothing. All they did was point at the poster. And at that time, it felt like you couldn't really say anything. They were only 4 years old. They didn't even know how to read fully at that point. So the parents had to get involved and find an interpreter, and the interpreter had to drive an hour and a half every day in order to interpret for that child. But they didn't have many unqualified interpreters in that area, so they were using that picture that I showed you here. And so you see that picture in the corner, that was the interpreter that they had for Nelson Mandela's funeral, his memorial service. And unfortunately, they did not have a qualified interpreter for that service, and that happens often. So you need to be vigilant and make sure that the interpreter is certified, see which organizations they're involved with, what kind of qualifications that they have they interpreted in different settings, in educational settings, things like that. You can see the registry of interpreters. If you would like to, you can look through that as well. Keep your eye on the interpreters and realize that not all interpreters are certified or qualified. I'd say in about 25 years, I found about 25,000 education interpreters, but only 400, I'm sorry, 20, in the year 20. So in the year 2015, there were about 25,000 educational interpreters, but only about 400 of them were certified for K through 12 educational interpreting and certified through RID, the Register of Interpreters for the Deaf. That's a nationally recognized interpreting organization. So you really just got to keep an eye out and make sure that the interpreters are certified and qualified for the job. And this is the last part about the IEP, the 5 rules, so to speak, things that I recommend for you guys. See what the school's expectations are for your child and compare them with the family's expectations for the child. And the goal should really be education. It's how they can develop that relationship and maintain those things, work together as a team. It's important that the family knows before they head into these meetings what their goals are. Because you don't want to start off the meeting in a negative way or with critiques and things like that. So recognize what the child needs and see what's happening with your child. And the goal is to protect that relationship between the school and the families. So it doesn't always go well. And that can have a negative effect on your child as well. They feel like, oh, maybe they're disappointed in me or something like that. And we don't want any type of negative impact on the child. And so these meetings, they can be tough. So make sure that you're getting as many resources as you can, see what lawyers are saying, things like that, getting outside resources, outsider tips. You know, meet with people before school, after school, have these conversations. And then understand the school as well. If you have concerns about finances, or if you have concerns whether or not they're following the proper laws and things like that. It's always important to try. So these are things that I recommend for IEP meetings. We have our different colors. Yellow is something that I recommend you do beforehand. Red is during the IEP meeting, and then green would be after the meeting. These are just tips, really. So for beforehand, make sure you have things planned out, write down your goals, clearly envision those goals, check the state curriculum, see what the standards are, and see where your child would meet those. So are they at a 4th grade reading level? Okay, let's look at the curriculum, compare things, see what the science classes look like, social studies, things like that, and then write down what the goals are for your specific child. Depends on their age and their grade level. You can look at online to see what your state curriculums look like. Also pay attention to what your child is doing at home. Are they often biting their nails? Do you notice that they're sad a lot? Or are they excited about certain classes? Take note of these types of things. Do they like when teachers do something? Do they not like when teachers do something? I know it can be overwhelming and it's hard to do. So maybe just take a bit at a time on a daily basis. Keep a notebook with you. Like I have this one here. Write things down that you want to remember, and then you can make sure that you look at those and bring those in for your IEP meeting. That's really helpful. So the second group is things that you should do during the meeting. Make sure you're introducing yourself and that your child's involved. Bring up any concerns that you have, questions, share some data that you've found, any research that you've found on the internet, bring that in. Make sure that they're just as informed as you are. Make sure that you mention your concerns. And if you do put those down, have that documented at the IEP, because that's going to help you out long-term, developing those long-term strategies. Once the meeting is finished, ask for a copy of the meeting, like a synopsis and the notes of what happened. An education advocate can come with your family as well and discuss how you felt about the meeting. And maybe that they notice the school is being resistant in certain areas. And so you can follow up in those areas later on. Here's another important tip. So here are the rules of the table at the IEP meeting. So you can identify the 3 different types of people that you're going to see. Red is a stop sign. That's the person who makes final decisions. They really hold the power in the room. Typically, it could be the IEP coordinator or the principal, people like that. Yellow is the change makers. They're often kind of in between. They may say something. They may say, oh, that's a good idea. They may want to talk about things more. They can have influence on what's going on within the meetings. This could be teachers, psychologists, or experts of some kind that have come in to join the meeting. Last is allies. Those are people who get it. They understand what children need. They can be advocates. They can be supportive. Things like speech therapists, teacher aides, things of that nature. You know, those who are involved in the team and have their eyes on the student. So you don't always have to focus on the stop signs, those players. You can focus on everyone else in the room as well. This can be before or after or even during the meeting as well. Just get a feel of the room and what people's positions are within it.
Okay, so make sure you write everything down, or you can type everything even. And again, you can ask for an email file of the notes, and that way you can print things or save them in your email, whatever is best for you. But it's important that they're filed and they're organized. You can ask for the evaluations, for the notes, for the IEP, for concerns, for any observations. Right now you can say my child's at home and this is what I'm noticing, and really keep that well documented and filed so it's ready to go for IEP meetings. It's good to write down data, any phone calls after you have a call, write down the day, the time, what you talked about, a brief little summary of who you talked with as well, so you can keep that in your file. And also you can after a phone call, email them and say, thanks for chatting with me. I just wanted to confirm these are things we talked about today, and have them reply. And then you would have that documented as well. An easy way to keep track of all those side communications. You can request minutes or notes from meetings. And I would suggest to not sign an IEP right away. Take the time to think about it, read it over, go home and have that extra time in a more calm setting to look over it, to make sure that you're checking the curriculum standards, to make sure that the textbooks, everything looks good, and make sure that their child is continuing to learn. I recently was on a court case for a situation saying that every child has to have an IEP processed within 1 year's time. This is really important shift, because before schools were saying, oh, well, they're still learning, so we're going to keep this IEP. But now the expectation is to continue to upgrade that IEP every single year to make sure that there's always advancements in education. So that is very important. So this is just for all you guys to take advantage, this chart. I won't go through it in detail, but you can just see some different laws. The red is IDEA, IDEA. And then the white is Section 504, the old federal law, the first one. And this applies to federal funding institutions. And then the last one is the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a really important one. And it was passed in 1990, which provided a lot of room for requiring communication access, language needs, social peers, making sure that everyone has equal access and opportunities. You know, if there's 20 kids in a classroom, the 19 kids, hearing kids, should be the same as the one deaf child, to make sure that everyone is the same. So ADA was a really great law to provide that resource and support for students. And these are just some guidelines you can see down at the bottom. There's a link to for more if you would like. So we were just talking about the ADA, and it's important that we follow the ADA, not just IDEA, but the ADA too. It's important we have both of these laws in play to protect children. And you can make changes for your IEP based on these. You can say, no, I want an interpreter now. I need captions now instead of, or CART, an FM system, any type of those accommodations. You do not need to wait for the next year to request it during the IEP meeting. It is the school's responsibility, and this law explains how you can advocate for that and tells them the law that they must follow. Sometimes schools will say, oh, they're doing fine. The student had their A and B student. They don't need any more support. But if you feel that your child is behind, if they need more social interaction, if they need anything to catch up, you should, students should feel comfortable. They should be able to interact with their peers and their teachers. They should be on the same page as the other students in class and have that same experience. They shouldn't be overly stressed or pressured. Their eyes shouldn't be exhausted at the end of the day, or tired from trying to listen and hear all day long. So students, they have enough during the day. It's important that they're relaxing at the end of the day too. And then this is last time before we move into some Q&A, just some things to keep in mind as you're going through this process with your child. These are things that I wish that I had had. Language access 100% of the time, and that's appropriate for a child to understand everything. Whether they're in the hallway, whether they're in the gym, the cafeteria, if they're playing sports, it doesn't matter. They really should have that language access constantly. If you're using a bilingual approach at school, at home, maybe you use different languages, you sign, read, write, speak, whatever it is, it's important that the child is able to access that at school as well. It's nice to have clubs and organizations and teams, different groups, play dates, times like that for your children to be able to interact and socialize with their peers. It's important to have role models for a deaf child to look up to. Sometimes it can be hard to find someone that looks and feels the same way they do, but it's really important. It's important to have educational support, as well as that family involvement, maybe some after school activities, some sports. There's been studies about the effects of being involved in group activities, especially if they're more isolated in school. It's important to have that peer interaction. Maybe it's plays or sports or chess club, whatever it is, whatever your child is interested. It's important to find those opportunities, and as well as the social and emotional needs of your student. We have specialists, paras, speech pathologists, audiologists, OT, PT, different services that are really critical for deaf children to have access to. So it's important to have a well-rounded team. And then again, there's some links there if you need more advocacy and support for your child. And this is my favorite painting. You can see the deaf child in that photo. Think about where your child is in that photo, because for everyone it's a little bit different. So you can think about that. And now I'm happy to start some question and answer. If you want to raise your hand or put that in the chat box, I am ready. Do we have any questions?